So let's talk about HR and interviewing right now. And so let's see here, share the screen and let's get started. So along the lines that we've been talking about, all the different tools that a HR officer may use to try to select the right employee, the interview process is crucial in that selection process. So along with the testing and simulations and background checks, we also need to interview and to ensure that we have let's see, trying to get this to work, okay? So we need to ensure that we are conducting the right type of interview. And there's a lot of different philosophies of interviews and how to make a good quality interview that really selects the best type of person. So basic type of interviews could be a structured interview. It could be a content interview and an administrator interview. So what does this mean? A structured interview means that you are asking every candidate the same questions in the same order, and you do not deviate from those questions, okay? When we ask content type of questions, we are digging for a certain type of information. And as we ask those questions, we are trying to understand what the person knows. And then another type is that the administration of interview. Would it be one-on-one? Would it be a group interview? Would it be a committee interview? Would it be via Zoom? And so forth. So structured versus unstructured interviews. There are advantages to each one and disadvantages. So in a structured or directive interview, the employer has this list of questions, and they may even have a score that goes with how the person answers those questions. In an unstructured interview, they don't actually follow a set format, and it's more free flow. And then there's degrees that you may follow in these formats. So is it a matter of preference? Companies may have a certain format that they follow. The structured interview at least allows you to compare candidates fairly equally of how they answered every question. So it allows you to compare more easily. The interview content, you could ask situational questions. So a situational interview could be like asking about their behavior in a given situation. So how would they act if a subordinate asked them for a certain thing, etc. So suppose you were faced with the following situation, how would you, okay, and so on. A behavioral interview would be, how did you react in an actual situation? So you ask them to describe something that happened, and then how did they behave, okay? So they're similar, yes, but in a situation, you present a scenario and you say, how would you do this? In a behavioral, you're telling them, give me a scenario in the past where this happened, describe it to me, and then how did you behave? What did you learn from it? you know, so they're giving an actual situation. And you get different scenarios from it, you get different results from it. I like a mixture of both, and it really depends. Like if I'm interviewing someone who has very little managerial experience, I'm going to use more situational. If I'm interviewing someone who has a lot of experience, I'm going to ask more behavioral. Other types of questions, you've got job-related questions where you're asking about past experiences. You've got stress interviews where you try to make the applicant uncomfortable. Sometimes the questions are even rude. I remember one interview situation that I went through where there were 3 interviewers sitting at one end of the table of this conference room. And then there were 6 of us that they were interviewing all together. And so there were actually 9 of us sitting around the table, and they were pitting us against each other. So they would ask me a question and they say, so Sue, how would you do that better than Kim did? Or, hey, Sam, do you think Kim did that right? Or do you think she made a mistake when she did that? You know, so they were like pitting us against each other in that stress interview. And believe me, the scenarios that happened in that interview were crazy. Let me just say they were absolutely crazy. And the things, I got the job, not to brag, but people were crazy in that interview. And they asked us things like, you know, why do you want the job? And one guy said, I need out of my man cave. I'm going a little crazy working in my basement. One person said, I'm recently divorced and I'm too depressed staying at home. You don't share stuff like that. One person said, I hate my boss and I need a better job and this looks pretty good. So it's like, no, people, no, you don't give those scenarios. So, but that came after they had pitted us against each other so much that people were just like blurting out craziness by then. Puzzle questions are very popular where you give like scenarios and you ask people to solve a problem. So how do you conduct interviews? Should it be one-on-one or a panel of interviewers? It's quite popular to have panels today. Do you want to do sequential or all at once? Do you want to do computerized or personal? By the way, computerized interviews are becoming more and more popular, where your initial interview, you have to just talk into a computer screen and answer questions, and it's being computer recorded. And they actually screen you out based on how well you do that. And then there's a lot more online interviews before they bring you in for face-to-face. So you could have mass interviewing, so you have a panel of interviewers and several candidates simultaneously. I worked for another college where they love to have a panel of faculty and administrators versus all the people that they were interviewing. And it was always a stress interview. They loved to like pit people against each other. It was like a wicked situation. And they got great pleasure in like trying to start cat fights. Like it was not a Christian environment. It was not a Christian school. And they asked me several times to apply for a promotion, and I refused to. I told them there was no way I was going to submit myself to that environment. Because I would hear them in the break room making fun of the situation that they had just put people through. And I thought it was super unethical. And eventually they asked me enough to apply for a position that they were not filling. And I told them if they appointed me to the position, I would take it. But if I had to interview for the position, I would not. And eventually they appointed me. So I got the promotion without ever interviewing for it. And I was very frank with them that I felt that what they were doing was not Christian. And the president of the college was a former pastor of another denomination, but still, he was a former pastor. And I just told him, I said, I would not be able to sleep at night if I did what you did. And I will not participate. So eventually they gave me the promotion. But anyway, that mass interview system is used a lot, not with a stress interview necessarily. I think that if you go into a situation where they're using that stress interview, beware of the culture that you are submitting yourself to and see if that's the kind of work environment you actually want to work in. That's just my take on it. There's also phone interviews, computer-based interviews, online video interviews. I mean, there's just a lot of ways that people are using today. If you're going to do an online video interview, like where you're recording yourself, you need to look presentable, clean up the space around you, because you want the space to look very clean and presentable. Do a test run and then relax. So I've done practices with students where I've sat across from them, across from the screen behind the camera, so that they're looking to me and they're talking to me. And I'm like smiling and giving them the thumbs up. I've even been back there holding notes where we've practiced, and I'm holding like cards up with what they should be saying. Sometimes it trips them up and sometimes it helps them. So it really depends on the person. I did that with my son when he was job hunting, and it did not help him. Eventually he kicked his mother out of the room and he did it on his own. So good for him. So let's see. My son's experience, because he just got a job in April. He graduated in May 2020. So, you know, mid-pandemic, jobs shut down, and graphic design major, and really struggled finding anything. So during the summer of 2020, as he was applying, he got several computer interviews where he did screening online, and it was like crickets. After he got those video interviews, crickets, no response, no yes, no no, silence. And he kept applying, but applying less because it was very discouraging. At first, we were doing 10 to 15 applications a week. And I say yes, us, because I was like hounding the poor boy. It's not good to be my kids when I teach this stuff, okay? Because I was like, let's do this. So the job market was drying up and there were fewer and fewer jobs available, but he kept applying on LinkedIn and on Indeed. So what we liked about LinkedIn is that you can see if they opened your file, if they looked at it, and you can see how many people applied for the job. Whereas Indeed, it's just a vacuum. You apply and crickets, okay, no silence. So, so then he started doing some active things in his field. So he started publishing stuff. He was working on his portfolio again. He started publishing some logos and being active in his field and continuing to apply. And it was a combination of that and then the marketplace starting to open up in March of 21. And he started getting phone calls and emails from jobs that he had applied for the summer before. And they were saying, hey, if you're still job hunting, please reapply. So he started reapplying for those along with new positions that were opening. And so he got a phone call from someone that he had applied, a new position that he had applied for on LinkedIn. They called him and interviewed him on the phone for like 20 minutes, an hour after they called and asked if he was available. Then they set up a Zoom interview for like 2 hours later. So they Zoom interviewed him. They liked that. And then they had him drive down 2.5 hours the next morning and interviewed him that afternoon. And they liked him and offered him a job on the spot. The interesting thing is that, and I think that was a Monday, Tuesday, yes. And then that evening, by the time he got home, he had 3 other companies who had reached out to him with, hey, you know, we want to interview you. And he went ahead and interviewed with a couple of them because he was curious. Even though he had already accepted the job, he wanted to know if there was something better. And he was still satisfied with the job he had accepted, so he kept that. But he was offered 3 more jobs after that and was contacted by several. So it was interesting that all of that work he had done all of a sudden snowballed when the marketplace opened again. So, and all of the positions that he interviewed for were either Zoom interviews. He did 4 or 5 online video interviews way before, but when the market reopened, everybody used Zoom. So I don't know what it's going to be like going forward, but that's what it turned out to be right now. Okay, so errors that can undermine an interview's usefulness, and you want to avoid these errors, right? So what would those errors be? So if you use structured interviews, for example, you're not consistent from one candidate to another, okay, then it makes it difficult. You want to focus and know what to ask. So you're avoiding those errors, right? So you want to know what you're asking. And then you want to avoid some of these common mistakes, okay? So what would some of these common mistakes be? So you don't want to, people make snap judgments based on first impressions, and you may want to try to suspend judgment, but it's really difficult, okay? Another mistake that you could make would be to not clarify what the job requires, and you could end up interviewing someone who's not interested. So it could be difficult, the candidate order or contrast error. So you interview people in a certain order and you could forget the first people compared to the last. And you could, another problem would be you could be under extreme pressure to hire. Other errors could be people's nonverbal behavior or the impression management. So how are people reacting and making that impression on you. And then there's always that personal characteristic effect. So attractiveness, gender, and race is always a sticking point of trying not to introduce that bias. Okay. The interviewer behavior, you do need to make sure that your behavior is not wrongly influencing the interviewee as well. And then, you know, I was talking about when you design that questionnaire, right? When you design a situational interview and you're deciding what you're going to ask, you need to make sure that you're asking questions that are going to really be useful, that are going to be helpful, that so you need to analyze the job, you need to know what the main duties are. Then you want to create the interview questions, you want to benchmark answers, and you want to like, for example, appoint people to ask certain questions, and they ask that question every time. So they're looking for certain things every single time. And then when you're conducting an interview, you need to know what the job is that you're interviewing the person for. You want to structure the interview. You want to be organized, especially if it's a committee, so that you're like structured and asking the same questions. You want to establish rapport with the person, take unobtrusive notes so that the person is still comfortable. And then you want to close the interview, and then afterwards you want to immediately review the interview with the committee so that so that it's fresh in your mind, okay, and you don't forget before you move on. And you do want to look at the competencies, the traits, the knowledge, the experience of those jobs, and compare to the employee, so that you are matching and you are looking at things side by side, and you're selecting the person, not because you just like them, but because they have the competencies that you need. So for example, you have the skill, right? You have an example of the skill, and then you have an interview question that matches that skill, and you've got the knowledge of the skill, the trait, or the experience, right? So you've got that profile component, you have an example, and you have a sample question. So once the interviews are done and you've selected the candidates, you're going to extend an offer. So how do you do that? You could use a judgmental approach or subjective weighing all the evidence about the candidates. You could use a statistical approach with quantified, using a formula to predict job success, or you could use some sort of a hybrid approach. So I like to put the candidates, the main points of what we're looking for. So it could be like the skill, knowledge, trait, experience, but more detailed, and I would put it like across the top in the columns. And then a 1 to 5 or 1 to 4 scale. And I would put numbers as we're interviewing, as they're answering that question, then I would rate them, and everybody else who's in the interview process would also be putting points. And then we come up with a score at the end, and we rank the candidates based on those scores. And then we may adjust those scores as we talk about those candidates. So I like doing that because it eliminates a lot of that bias. So then when we make the job offer, it's going to include pay rates, benefits, the actual job duties. There may be some negotiation, and then we reach an agreement. When you write the written offer, you need a letter. There's going to be a welcome sentence. You're going to have the pay, benefits, the paid leave information, terms of employment information. And then you're going to have a contract. The contract is going to say how long the contract is for, any severance provisions, non-disclosure requirements, covenants to non-compete, and relocation provisions if you're paying to help them relocate. So those items take you through the big picture of this chapter. I have always found that the interview process, getting to know someone, is a load of fun, and being able to select that person is just an exciting proposition where you're getting to know people, you're networking, and you're trying to choose that right person. The challenge is a lot of times I want to hire them all. I get this person would be great for this and this person would be great for this, and then you're having to like select like the best person and wheedle it down, and it can be really challenging. But overall, super exciting, and when you do it well, it's a beautiful experience. So hopefully when you're on the receiving end of the interview, knowing this background process as well will make it easier for you as well. So.